Deep in the ancient forests of medieval Japan, cedar trees stood like silent monks, their trunks draped in moss, their roots curling as if breathing. The Japanese called them sugi, those who rise straight toward heaven. From shrines and coffins to humble chopsticks, cedar wood carried the scent of purity and the soul of devotion. People believed that within each grain of its wood, the mountain gods were still alive, whispering through the wind that passed between the leaves. In medieval Japan, the cedar tree, Cryptomeria japonica, or sugi, was not merely a plant, it was a bridge between heaven and earth. Its tall, straight trunk seemed to pierce the clouds, while its deep roots anchored firmly in sacred soil. Ancient Japanese saw this duality as a reflection of the world itself, a harmony between the divine and the human. These towering evergreens thrived on misty mountainsides, where rain, fog, and silence shaped their slow, solemn growth. Some lived for more than 1,000 years, standing witness to dynasties, wars, and prayers whispered beneath their shade. Their endurance made them symbols of eternity, while their calm presence inspired both reverence and fear. In the Shinto belief, every great tree was thought to house a kami, a divine spirit. Cedars, with their majesty and fragrance, were considered the purest vessels of such power. Ropes of sacred straw, shimanawa, were tied around their trunks to mark the dwelling of the gods, and villagers passed quietly before them, never daring to touch without bowing first. Thus, the cedar was more than wood. It was a living altar, a reminder that nature itself could embody divinity. To cut a cedar without prayer was unthinkable. To walk beneath one was to step, if only briefly, into the realm of the sacred. Cedar wood became the backbone of Japan's sacred architecture. Most ancient Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples were built entirely from it, not because it was common, but because it was eternal. Its fragrance was light yet cleansing, its resistance to rot unmatched, and when carved, it released a faint aroma that lingered like incense. Carpenters treated the act of building with spiritual discipline. Before felling a tree, they bowed and offered sake or rice to the forest spirits, asking forgiveness for the life they would take. This ritual was not superstition but acknowledgement. To harm nature without respect was to wound the gods themselves. The most sacred site of all, the Grand Shrine of Ise, has been rebuilt every 20 years for over a millennium, always with fresh cedar. Each reconstruction symbolizes death and rebirth, an eternal cycle mirroring the Shinto view of impermanence. No stone or iron holds the structure together, only wood, breath, and faith. Walking through those cedar halls, pilgrims said they could feel time dissolve. The scent of the forest still lingered in the beams, as though the mountain itself had followed them into the shrine. In such spaces, silence became prayer, and cedar, the voice of the gods. In the sacred rituals of Shinto, cedar branches played a central role as conduits between humans and gods. During purification ceremonies known as Haori, priests waved sprigs of sugi to sweep away impurity, both physical and spiritual. The sound of the leaves rustling through the air was believed to calm the restless spirits and invite the kami to descend. When burned, cedar wood released a smoke unlike any other, light, clean, and fragrant. It was said that this smoke carried prayers upward, dissolving into the sky where the gods resided. The act of burning cedar was therefore both offering and dialogue, a quiet conversation between earth and heaven. Sacred objects such as mikoshi, portable shrines, altar tables, and ritual boxes were crafted from carefully selected cedar. Even the curtains that separated the human from the divine within temples were suspended from cedar frames. The presence of this wood sanctified the very air. To touch it was to touch purity. To smell it was to inhale devotion. In the medieval mind, cedar was not just material, it was medium, a bridge, and through it, the unseen could be seen. The gods could be felt not through vision, but through scent, texture, and silence. Beyond temples and shrines, cedar found its way into the rhythm of everyday life. Farmers built their homes from sugi, its wood keeping interiors cool in summer and dry during humid rains. Craftsmen shaped it into majiwapa lunchboxes, tubs for bathing, and simple chopsticks, each item breathing with the same sacred scent as the forest. When hot water met cedar, the fragrance rose gently, like mist over a mountain stream. Families believed this aroma soothed the heart and cleansed the mind. Even in modest homes, the presence of cedar brought the calm of a temple. Children learned early that to waste a piece of sugi was disrespectful. Old wood was not discarded but reused, as shelves, toys, or firewood offered with a quiet prayer. The philosophy was simple yet profound. Everything that comes from nature must return with gratitude. In a world before metal and concrete, cedar's warmth defined comfort itself. It was both shield and spirit, a companion that lived beside people, aging gracefully as they did. In every creak of a cedar floorboard, one could still hear the whisper of the mountain that gave it life. Among the samurai, cedar wood carried meanings far deeper than utility. Its straight grain and unyielding strength became metaphors for discipline, loyalty, and inner balance, virtues at the heart of the warrior's code. To a samurai, the cedar's unwavering trunk symbolized a life lived without bending before corruption or fear. In Zen temples, monks meditated beneath cedar trees to absorb their stillness. The tree's quiet persistence through centuries was a lesson in detachment, to grow upward, free from the noise of the world. The scent of cedar, dry and pure, became intertwined with the essence of zazen meditation: simplicity, focus, and transience. Training swords, bokken, were often carved from cedar, light enough to move with precision but resilient enough to withstand countless strikes. The weight and warmth of the wood taught the student that mastery was not about force, but harmony between body, breath, and intention. Even death was tied to the cedar's spirit. Samurai coffins were built from its planks, ensuring that the warrior's final rest was surrounded by purity. In this way, cedar embraced both battle and peace, sound and silence. For the samurai and the monk alike, sugi stood as a mirror of the self, tall, calm, incorruptible, and forever reaching toward heaven. Across medieval Japan, entire forests of cedar were regarded as living shrines. The famous Cedar Avenue of Nikko, planted in the 17th century, still stretches for miles, more than 13,000 trees forming a corridor of shade and silence. Travellers described walking beneath them as entering another world, where even sound seemed to bow. Far to the south, on the mist-covered island of Yakushima, ancient cedars like the Jomonsugi have stood for over 2 millennia. Their trunks are twisted by time, yet they radiate a solemn dignity that defies decay. Monks once journeyed there to meditate, believing that every drop of rain falling through the cedar canopy carried divine blessing. Pilgrims approached such trees barefoot, their steps slow and deliberate. They whispered prayers not to a god above, but to the forest itself, a vast cathedral without walls. Even the air in these groves felt sanctified, cool, moist, and heavy with centuries of breath. To stand among those cedars was to feel the pulse of eternity. Each tree was a witness, each root a thread binding the human soul to the earth. And in that stillness, people found what temples could only echo, the living presence of the divine. In medieval Japan, nature was never seen as a mere resource. It was a living being deserving reverence. When woodcutters entered a cedar forest, they did not shout or rush. They whispered apologies to the trees. Before felling a single sugi, a small altar was built at its base. A cup of sake, a pinch of salt, and a burr were offered to acknowledge the spirit that dwelled within. The act of cutting was deliberate and solemn. The first strike of the axe was preceded by silence, a shared breath between human and tree. Once the cedar fell, the workers would pause, hands pressed together in gratitude. The remaining branches and bark were gathered carefully, later burned in rituals of thanksgiving. Nothing was wasted, because every fragment still carried the memory of life. This practice reflected a worldview in which humanity and nature were bound by moral duty. The forest provided shelter, heat, and sacred material, but only to those who approached it with humility. Such rituals transformed labour into prayer. The lumberyard was as sacred as the shrine. Through this relationship of respect, Japan's ancient cedar groves endured for centuries. They were not managed, but cared for, tended like ancestors. To harm a forest without permission was not just an ecological sin, it was a spiritual crime against the gods of the land. Cedar's sacredness seeped into Japanese art, poetry, and philosophy. In Heian-era literature, poets described the scent of sugi as the breath of sleeping mountains. It was a fragrance of silence, deep, cool, and eternal. To encounter it was to remember one's smallness before nature. Artisans who crafted lacquered boxes or calligraphy chests favoured cedar for its grain, soft as waves, light as mist. They believed the wood itself contributed to the beauty of the object, not as decoration, but as spirit. The slow pulse of the tree, the rhythm of the rings, gave the object an invisible life. In the aesthetics of wabi-sabi, imperfection and decay were not flaws but revelations. A cedar beam darkened by smoke, a crack running along its surface. These were not blemishes but traces of time. To the Japanese mind, age did not diminish value. It deepened it. Thus, old cedar became a metaphor for existence itself, fragile, flawed, yet profoundly beautiful. When sunlight passed through a temple's cedar lattice, it painted shifting shadows across the floor. Those shadows, like passing years, were fleeting, and that was the point. For beauty, they believed, lives not in permanence, but in the moment it begins to fade. Cedar was more than sacred. It was medicine. In medieval Japan, healers used its oil to treat wounds, fevers, and fatigue. The resin contained natural antiseptic qualities that protected wood, and the body, from decay. When burned, its smoke purified both air and spirit. Even the scent of cedar was believed to strengthen the heart and steady the mind. Homes built of sugi stayed cool in summer and dry in rain, guarding families from the damp air that spread disease. Sleeping in a cedar room was thought to invite good dreams, the kind carried by benevolent spirits drifting from the mountains. Monks used cedar oil during meditation, rubbing a drop onto their wrists to remind themselves to breathe slowly, to live as steadily as the trees. In the dim interiors of temples, wooden pillars glowed faintly with age, exuding warmth instead of cold. People would touch them for comfort, believing the wood absorbed sorrow like water into soil. To the Japanese, cedar's healing lay not in its chemistry but in its spirit, an endurance that whispered, "All things recover if treated with respect." Thus, sugi became a quiet guardian. It kept rot from houses, pain from bodies, and despair from hearts. It was the doctor of the forest, curing not only flesh, but the restless soul. In the medieval Japanese world, every cedar was more than a tree. It was a shrine of breath and memory. The people did not separate the sacred from the mundane. They found holiness in the grain of wood, in the scent of smoke, in the way a beam caught morning light. From the grand pillars of icy shrine to a humble rice box carved by a villager, sugi embodied the same truth. Divinity lives where respect does. Its presence connected human hands to divine intention, forming a silent covenant between the living and the eternal. The cedar taught the Japanese that life was not about ownership, but belonging to the rhythm of nature, to the cycle of use and renewal. When a cedar aged, cracked, and darkened, it was not dying, it was remembering. And so, in its fragrance, the past still breathes, the mountains still speak. And perhaps the modern world, in its noise and haste, has forgotten what the ancients once knew. Nothing in this world is truly lifeless, if we still know how to bow before it.